Jake Morrison had 3 rules for staying alive in a galaxy that seemed personally offended by his continued existence. Never trust a Zephyrian with your wallet, never drink anything that glows without checking if it's supposed to, and never take jobs that sound too good to be true. Unfortunately, his credit account was flashing numbers so red they practically screamed, which meant Rule 3 was about to take a vacation. Nexus Station hummed around him like a metallic beehive, all chrome corridors and flickering holodisplays advertising everything from genuine Andromedan silk to suspiciously affordable cybernetic implants. The air recyclers worked overtime to process the exotic atmospheric requirements of dozens of species, creating a cocktail that smelled like ozone, exotic spices, and something that might have been desperation. Jake nursed his drink, a local specialty called Void Walker that promised to dissolve your troubles and possibly your stomach lining. While scanning the crowd through the smoky haze of the observation deck, the Nexus attracted the galaxy's most interesting people, which was a polite way of saying criminals, outcasts, and folks who preferred their business conducted away from prying government eyes. Today felt different, though. The usual chatter had an edge to it, conversations conducted in hushed tones with frequent glances toward the docking rings. Another round, soldier boy. The bartender, a Kytherian whose blue-scaled skin gleamed under the ambient lighting, gestured toward Jake's nearly empty glass with one of his 4 arms while simultaneously serving 3 other customers. Keep 'em coming, Zex. My liver's feeling optimistic today. Jake slid his credit chip across the bar, hoping it wouldn't bounce. Again. Optimistic or suicidal? That's your 4th Void Walker. Zex's gill slits fluttered, the Kytherian equivalent of a chuckle. Most humans tap out after 2. Most humans haven't had my training in chemical warfare. Jake downed the remainder of his drink and immediately regretted several life choices. Besides, I'm celebrating. What's the occasion? My last employer decided payment was more of a guideline than a requirement. Funny how their entire facility lost artificial gravity for a week right after that conversation. Zex's laugh sounded like water running over rocks. You always were subtle as a plasma cannon. The observation deck's massive transparent steel windows offered a view of the station's docking arms, where vessels from across known space nestled against umbilical connections like exotic fish feeding at a reef. Jake had seen every class of ship imaginable dock here, sleek ethereal cruisers that looked like they'd been grown rather than built, blocky Terran vessels that prioritized function over form, and the occasional mystery ship whose origins nobody discussed too loudly. A commotion near the main airlock caught his attention. The crowd was parting like someone had opened a plasma vent, conversations dying as beings pressed themselves against bulkheads with the universal instinct of prey animals spotting a predator. Now that's interesting, Jake muttered, squinting through the haze. The first figure through the airlock wore armor that seemed to be carved from living crystal, refracting the station's lighting into prismatic rainbows. Ethereal Honor Guard. Jake had seen their kind before, usually right before situations became significantly more complicated. They moved with the fluid precision of professional killers, scanning the crowd with weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. Behind them came someone who made Jake forget about his drink entirely. She moved like poetry written in quantum equations, each step calculated to create maximum impact with minimum effort. Her skin held the characteristic pale luminescence of the ethereal nobility, and her hair fell in waves the color of liquid starlight. But it was her ears that marked her true status, elongated and elegantly pointed. They swept back from her temples like delicate wings, marking her as royalty among a species that considered genetic purity a divine mandate. Sweet neutron stars, Zex whispered, his scales darkening to deep indigo, a sign of either fear or religious awe. That's Princess Lyralii of the Ethereal Dominion. Jake nearly choked on his drink. The Princess Lyralii? The one who supposedly talks to quantum fields like their old friends? The very same. Question is, what's she doing on a backwater station like this? Ethereal royalty doesn't exactly slum it with us common folk. The princess moved through the crowd like a force of nature, her guards maintaining a protective formation while beings of every species found urgent business elsewhere. She paused occasionally to examine someone with those impossibly deep eyes, as if she could see through flesh to the quantum patterns beneath. Jake found himself holding his breath as her gaze swept across the observation deck. Those eyes, silver with flecks of gold that seemed to shift like distant nebulae, passed over him once, twice, then stopped. Fixed on him with an intensity that made his nervous system register several different types of alarm. Zex? Why is alien royalty staring at me like I'm either dinner or the answer to a very important question? Probably because you're the only human in here stupid enough not to look away when she makes eye contact. Zex's scales had gone completely black now. Jake, whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. But Princess Lyralii was already moving toward them, her guards flanking her in a formation that suggested they'd practiced this maneuver many times. The crowd parted before her like space around a gravity well, leaving Jake alone at the bar feeling suddenly exposed. She stopped 3 meters away, close enough to speak privately, far enough to maintain diplomatic protocol. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate in dimensions Jake didn't know existed. You are the one they call Morrison. It wasn't a question. Jake managed what he hoped was a casual shrug. Depends who's asking and whether they're carrying arrest warrants. A ghost of a smile played at the corners of her mouth. I am Lyralii, first daughter of the ethereal dominion, keeper of the quantum flame, and heir to the crystal throne. She paused, studying him with those unsettling eyes. And I have need of your services. My services? Jake gestured around the bar. Lady, I'm between jobs and 3 drinks past good judgment. Whatever you need, I'm probably not your guy. On the contrary. She stepped closer, and Jake caught a scent like ozone in winter mornings. You are precisely my guy, as you put it. Behind him, Zex made a sound like a deflating atmospheric processor. Around the observation deck, conversations had stopped entirely. Even the station's background hum seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Princess Lyralii raised one pale hand, and Jake noticed that her fingers ended in nails that looked like crystallized light. When she spoke again, it was in a language that predated human civilization, words that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly in his bones. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Every piece of ethereal technology on the station, communication arrays, life support systems, quantum processors, suddenly hummed in harmony. Emergency lighting flickered to life as systems registered energy signatures that hadn't been seen in 3 centuries. Jake's universal translator struggled with the ancient words, finally offering a rough approximation. By quantum and void, by starbirth and entropy, I invoke the ritual of choosing. Let the universe witness that I, Lyralii of the eternal line, bind my fate to this warrior, that our destinies might be woven as one thread in the cosmic pattern. The silence that followed was so complete Jake could hear his own heartbeat. Then, chaos erupted. Every communication device on the station began broadcasting simultaneously as news of the princess's words spread through quantum channels faster than light itself. Ethereal honor guards throughout the station received priority transmissions that had them reaching for weapons. The Terran trade delegation's security detail suddenly found urgent reasons to check their pulse rifles. Well, Jake said, setting down his glass with hands that weren't quite steady. I'm guessing this is the part where my day gets significantly more complicated. Princess Lyralii's smile was radiant and terrifying. Captain Morrison, I do believe that would be an understatement. Behind the bar, Zex was frantically wiping down glasses that were already clean. Jake, you magnificent idiot, do you have any idea what just happened? Enlighten me. She just made you the most wanted man in 7 sectors. Zex's scales were cycling through colors like a malfunctioning mood ring. The ritual of choosing hasn't been invoked in over 300 years. Last time it happened, 2 star systems went to war. Jake looked at the princess, who seemed remarkably calm for someone who just turned his life into a galactic incident. Any particular reason you decided to ruin my evening, Your Highness? Because, she said, those impossible eyes holding depths that spoke of quantum mathematics and cosmic forces beyond human comprehension. Sometimes the universe requires us to make choices that seem insane but are actually inevitable. Alarms began blaring throughout the station as security forces mobilized. In the distance, Jake could hear the distinctive whine of charging weapons and the heavy footsteps of riot gear. "Right," he said, finishing his drink in one burning gulp. "In that case, I think this is our cue to leave." The calculated risk had seen better decades. Jake slammed his fist against the navigation console for the third time in 5 minutes, coaxing another few seconds of functionality from systems held together by prayer and industrial-grade adhesive tape. Sparks cascaded from an overhead panel, adding to the ship's impressive collection of scorch marks and unauthorized modifications. "Come on, you beautiful disaster," he muttered to the ship. "Don't fail me now." Princess Lyralii sat in the co-pilot's seat with the poise of someone attending a diplomatic reception rather than fleeing for her life through the shattered nebula. Her elongated ears twitched occasionally as explosions bloomed in their wake, but otherwise she maintained a serene composure that apparently came standard with royal breeding. "Your vessel has a unique personality," she observed as another panel began smoking. "That's one way to put it." Jake yanked a fire suppression canister from its mounting and doused the latest electrical rebellion. "I prefer to think of her as temperamental. Like a fusion reactor with abandonment issues." Behind them, the ethereal pursuit ships maintained their relentless formation, their crystalline hulls refracting the nebula's cosmic radiation into deadly light shows. Jake had to admit they were beautiful, right up until they started shooting. "Incoming plasma torpedoes," the ship's computer announced in a voice that managed to sound bored despite their imminent destruction. "Shall I prepare the last will and testament subroutines?" "Not today, Arya." Evasive pattern delta. The fly like a drunk comet maneuver. Charming. The ship lurched into a corkscrew dive that would have liquefied most organic beings without proper acceleration compensation. Jake's modified inertial dampeners kept them merely uncomfortable instead of dead, though his breakfast made a strong argument for abandoning ship. Lyralii seemed entirely unaffected by the maneuver. In fact, she appeared to be meditating, her hands moving in complex patterns over the co-pilot's console. The ship's quantum field generators began resonating in harmony with her movements, probability matrices shifting in ways that made Jake's instruments report impossible readings. "What are you doing over there?" Encouraging the universe to be more cooperative, she replied without opening her eyes. "Your ship's quantum signature is quite remarkable. It exists in approximately 17 different states of repair simultaneously. That explains why the warranty was voided before I bought her." Jake pulled the ship into another impossible turn, using a collapsing asteroid's gravity well to slingshot past a pursuing cruiser. "Can you maybe encourage the universe to make our pursuers less accurate?" Lyralii's fingers danced across quantum fields invisible to human perception. The pursuing torpedo spread suddenly veered off course, their guidance systems apparently deciding that empty space looked much more threatening than Jake's ship. Impressive. Where did an ethereal princess learn to mess with probability? Royal education includes many subjects your human schools neglect. Quantum mechanics, diplomatic immunity, and the proper way to survive assassinations before breakfast. A plasma blast seared past their starboard side, close enough to trigger proximity alarms. Speaking of which, might I suggest we discuss escape strategies rather than my curriculum? Jake was already 3 steps ahead, fingers flying over his custom navigation array. The shattered nebula earned its name from the spectacular way it turned ships into their component atoms, but it also provided cover that made sensor tracking nearly impossible. His modifications to the calculated risk included several systems that weren't exactly legal, including a gravitic resonance mapper that could thread them through gravitational anomalies that would crush conventional vessels. "Hold on to something," he warned, engaging the resonance drive. Reality twisted sideways as the ship slipped between dimensions of folded spacetime. For a moment, Jake could see through the nebula's quantum foam to the underlying structure of the universe, mathematical equations written in fire and void, constants that governed everything from stellar fusion to the price of coffee on frontier worlds. They emerged from the dimensional fold inside a pocket of relative stability, hidden within the shadow of a neutron star's accretion disk. The pursuing ships overshot their position, their sensors confused by the exotic radiation that made this region of space simultaneously the most dangerous and most perfect hiding spot in 3 sectors. "Nicely done," Lyralii said, finally opening those impossible eyes. "Though I should mention that your gravitic drive appears to be leaking quantum foam." Jake glanced at his instruments and discovered she was right. Several systems were reporting readings that violated basic physics, which on the calculated risk usually meant Tuesday. "Aria, damage report." "Good news and bad news, Captain. The good news is we've successfully evaded pursuit. The bad news is we're currently existing in a quantum superposition between being completely intact and being scattered across 17 dimensions. Also, we're out of coffee." "The coffee situation is critical," Jake agreed, checking their supplies. "How long can we maintain this position?" "Approximately 6 hours before our quantum coherence degrades beyond acceptable parameters. Or until someone figures out how to scan for dimensional echoes. Whichever comes first." Lyralii was studying her hands with the fascination of someone discovering they were attached to her arms. Faint silver patterns traced across her pale skin, following the lines of her veins in geometric designs that hurt to look at directly. "Interesting," she murmured. "The choosing appears to be manifesting more quickly than expected. Should I be worried about those glowing tattoos?" "They're not tattoos. They're quantum entanglement markers." She flexed her fingers, and the patterns pulsed brighter. "The ritual creates a connection between 2 beings across multiple dimensional planes. It's quite beautiful, actually. And probably incredibly dangerous. Most beautiful things are." She looked at him with those eyes that seemed to hold entire galaxies. "Tell me, Captain Morrison, have you experienced any unusual sensations since our departure?" Jake considered this while trying to restart a cooling system that apparently objected to existing in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Now that she mentioned it, he had been feeling oddly lucky. Their escape from Nexus Station should have been impossible. Security forces from 3 different governments had been converging on their position, and yet they'd slipped through gaps that opened at exactly the right moments. Maybe. Hard to tell the difference between alien quantum magic and my usual talent for barely surviving stupid situations. Your talent may be more literal than you realize. Lyralii stood and moved to the main display, her elongated ears tilting forward with interest. According to my readings, you've survived 14 encounters with odds calculated at less than 0.3% probability. In the past year. I prefer to think of it as aggressive optimism. Or quantum resonance. Some beings naturally align with probability streams in ways that influence outcomes. She traced patterns in the air, and the ship's sensors began reporting energy signatures that shouldn't exist. The choosing may have amplified that ability. A proximity alert interrupted their philosophical discussion. Jake's instruments registered multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the nebula, not the elegant ethereal vessels they'd escaped, but something else entirely. "Aria, identification on those contacts." "Scanning." "Oh, wonderful. They're broadcasting identification as the Terran Federation vessel Righteous Fury, accompanied by, let me double-check this, yes, the Order of Stellar Purity's crusade ship Divine Retribution." Jake felt his stomach drop into his boots. "The fanatics are here too?" "It appears our union has attracted attention from multiple interested parties," Lyralii said calmly. "The Order considers human-alien relationships a cosmic abomination that must be purified with extreme prejudice." "And the feds?" "Probably want to arrest me for diplomatic violations and you for everything else you've ever done." Jake watched as more contacts appeared on his screens. Ships were converging on their position from multiple vectors, turning their hiding spot into the center of an impromptu naval battle. Energy signatures indicated enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. "This is exactly the kind of situation I was hoping to avoid when I got up this morning," he muttered, running pre-flight checks on systems that probably wouldn't survive another dimensional jump. "Consider the alternative," Lyralii said, those silver patterns on her skin pulsing in rhythm with the ship's quantum generators. "We could be having this conversation in a detention cell." "Good point." Jake engaged the engines, feeling the calculated risk respond with the mechanical equivalent of a long-suffering sigh. "Any suggestions for our next impossible escape?" Princess Lyralii smiled, and for a moment Jake could see something ancient and powerful behind those beautiful features, something that had watched civilizations rise and fall across the cosmic dark. "Captain Morrison," she said, "I believe it's time you learned what the choosing actually means." Outside their hiding place, the gathered fleets began closing in, their weapons charging with the distinctive whine of impending violence. In the depths of space, probability streams shifted and twisted as two beings bound by quantum entanglement prepared to discover just how far the universe was willing to bend its rules. "Right then," Jake said, cracking his knuckles. "Let's see what other laws." The abandoned mining facility hung in space like a metallic tumor, its skeletal superstructure twisted by decades of cosmic radiation and neglect. Jake guided the calculated risk through a debris field of discarded mining equipment, dodging chunks of crystallized ore that glittered like frozen stars in the void. "Well, this looks welcoming," he muttered, studying the facility's darkened docking bays. "Nothing says safe haven like a derelict industrial complex in the middle of nowhere." Princess Lyralii leaned forward in her seat, those impossibly pointed ears twitching as she examined their destination. "The quantum signature is unusual. This facility was built on a natural convergence point." "Convergence of what?" "Probability streams. Dimensional fault lines. The kind of cosmic real estate that makes mathematicians weep with joy and safety inspectors file for early retirement." Jake maneuvered them toward what appeared to be the least structurally compromised docking bay, wincing as their hulls scraped against twisted metal. The facility's automated systems flickered to life as they approached, emergency lighting casting eerie shadows through corridors that hadn't seen maintenance crews in decades. "Arya, can you interface with their computers?" "I'm trying, Captain, but their operating system predates the invention of user-friendly interfaces. It's like trying to have a conversation with a particularly stubborn rock that only speaks ancient mathematics." A grinding sound echoed through the ship as magnetic clamps engaged, securing them to a docking arm that probably violated several dozen safety regulations. Atmospheric processors wheezed to life, flooding the bay with air that smelled like ozone and regret. "Breathable atmosphere detected," Arya announced. "Also detecting trace amounts of exotic particles, quantum fluctuations, and what appears to be coffee residue from approximately 15 years ago." "Coffee residue?" Jake perked up. "Maybe this place isn't completely abandoned." They made their way through the airlock into corridors lined with defunct quantum processors and mining equipment that looked like it had been designed by engineers with a severe lack of imagination. Emergency lighting cast everything in a sickly amber glow, and their footsteps echoed with the hollow sound of empty spaces trying to remember their purpose. "The quantum resonance is getting stronger," Lyralii observed, her skin beginning to show faint traces of those silver patterns. "There's something active deeper in the facility." Jake checked his sidearm and immediately felt better about their situation by approximately 3%. "Define something active in terms that won't give me nightmares." "Probably a quantum computer array. Possibly a dimensional research station. Definitely not anything that would pass a safety inspection." They followed the facility's main corridor deeper into its bowels, past laboratories filled with equipment that buzzed with residual energy and workshops where abandoned projects gathered dust in the recycled air. The quantum resonance grew stronger with each step, making Jake's teeth ache and causing his chronometer to display the time in several different temporal dimensions simultaneously. "This is fascinating," Lyralii said, examining readouts on a still-functional console. According to these logs, this facility was researching practical applications for quantum entanglement manipulation. Practical like making coffee taste better, or practical like turning enemies into exotic particles. More like rewriting the fundamental laws of probability. She paused at another console, her elongated ears practically vibrating with interest. Jake, I think we need to. A voice echoed from the facility's communication system, startling them both into defensive positions. Well, well, well. Visitors to my little slice of nowhere. How delightfully unexpected. The voice was human, female, and carried the kind of cheerful sarcasm that suggested its owner had long since passed the point where mortal peril was anything more than a minor inconvenience. Arya, tell me that's a recording, Jake muttered. Negative, Captain. The voice is coming from the facility's central computer core, approximately 2 kilometers deeper into the complex. And it's definitely alive. Alive, caffeinated, and apparently watching us through the security cameras. Jake looked up at the nearest monitoring device and offered a half-hearted wave. Hello there. Hope we're not trespassing too badly. Trespassing? Oh, honey, this place has been abandoned longer than some civilizations have existed. I'm just happy for the company. The voice paused. Though I have to ask. Are you the couple that's been causing all the excitement in the quantum channels? Lyralii stepped forward, her royal training apparently covering protocols for talking to disembodied voices in abandoned facilities. I am Princess Lyralii of the Ethereal Dominion. This is Captain Morrison. Might we inquire as to your identity? Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenoarchaeologist, quantum theorist, and current resident hermit of this technological graveyard. Also the person who's been tracking the energy signatures from your little ritual across half the galaxy. Jake frowned. You've been tracking us. Not you specifically. The quantum wake you're leaving behind. It's like following breadcrumbs, if breadcrumbs were made of concentrated probability and left trails that make physicists question their career choices. A section of the corridor wall slid open, revealing a transport tube that hummed to life with the sound of machinery remembering how to function. Emergency lighting illuminated the interior, along with a handwritten sign that read, "Express elevator to questionable decisions, mind the temporal loops." Charming, Jake said, eyeing the transport dubiously. Any chance this thing won't deposit us in an alternate dimension? Only one way to find out, Elena's voice replied cheerfully. Besides, the odds of dimensional displacement are only about 12%. 15 if you count parallel timelines where you're wearing different socks. They climbed into the transport, which immediately accelerated through the facility's superstructure at speeds that made Jake's inner ear file formal complaints. The walls blurred past, occasionally revealing glimpses of laboratories filled with equipment that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. So, Dr. Vasquez, Lyralii said, apparently unaffected by their high-speed journey through industrial architecture, what exactly were you researching before finding yourself monitoring our quantum signatures? Ancient ethereal artifacts, primarily. Turns out your ancestors were quite busy little cosmic engineers. They didn't just build ships and cities, they built reality adjustment mechanisms. The transport decelerated, depositing them in a vast chamber dominated by quantum processors arranged in geometric patterns that made Jake's eyes water. Banks of monitors displayed star charts, mathematical equations, and what appeared to be probability calculations for events that hadn't happened yet. Dr. Elena Vasquez emerged from behind a console, and Jake immediately revised his mental image of the typical xenoarchaeologist. She was younger than her voice suggested, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and eyes that held the particular gleam of someone who'd spent too much time staring into the cosmic dark. "Welcome to my little corner of scientific madness," she said, gesturing at the humming machinery around them. "Coffee? Please tell me you have real coffee," Jake said desperately. "Real coffee, synthetic coffee, coffee that exists in quantum superposition until observed, and one blend that's technically from next Tuesday." Elena moved to a machine that looked like it had been assembled from spare spacecraft parts. "Fair warning, the Tuesday blend has some unusual side effects. At this point, I'll take anything that doesn't actively violate causality," Jake said, accepting a steaming mug that smelled like salvation. Lyralii was studying the quantum processors with the focused attention of someone who understood exactly what she was looking at. This is a probability manipulation array. You've been using it to calculate potential futures. Among other things. Elena settled into a chair that had been retrofitted with more monitoring equipment than most starship bridges. When you two performed your little ritual, it set off quantum resonances throughout this entire sector. I've been tracking the ripple effects, and let me tell you, the universe is not happy about the precedent you're setting. What kind of precedent? Jake asked, though he suspected he wasn't going to like the answer. Elena gestured at the main display, which showed a three-dimensional map of local space covered in swirling patterns of light. The choosing doesn't just bind two individuals. It creates a quantum entanglement that affects probability streams across multiple dimensions. You're essentially rewriting the rules of cause and effect in real time. That sounds bad, Jake said. It's catastrophically dangerous, Elena agreed cheerfully. Also absolutely fascinating from a theoretical standpoint. Your combined quantum signature is creating possibilities that shouldn't exist. The facility's communication system crackled to life with incoming transmissions. Multiple voices overlapped in a chaos of languages and threats, but the general message was clear: they'd been found. Order of Stellar Purity, Terran Federation, Ethereal Honor Guard, and something called the Shadow Conclave, Elena translated, monitoring the transmissions. Congratulations, you've managed to unite the galaxy's major powers in a common cause. That cause being hunting you down. The Shadow Conclave? Lyralii's skin patterns flared brighter. They're supposed to be a myth. Myths have a way of becoming inconveniently real around here, Elena said, fingers flying over her controls. Especially when people start messing with fundamental forces. The good news is this facility has defensive systems that still work. The bad news is they were designed by someone with a very flexible relationship with the laws of physics. Jake watched as hostile contacts appeared on the facility's sensors, ships from multiple factions converging on their position like antibodies attacking an infection. How long do we have? About 30 minutes before they're in firing range. Less if they decide to skip the dramatic posturing and go straight to the blow everything up phase of negotiations. Alarms began sounding throughout the facility as automated defenses powered up, weapons systems that had been dormant for decades cycling through activation sequences with mechanical enthusiasm. Right, Jake said, draining his coffee and immediately feeling more optimistic about their survival prospects. What's the plan? Elena grinned, and Jake realized he was looking at someone who'd spent entirely too much time alone with dangerous technology and exotic physics. Well, we could run. Or we could use this facility's quantum manipulation array to do something really stupid. Define really stupid, Lyralii said, though her tone suggested she was already intrigued by the possibilities. We could try to quantum entangle your pursuers with each other. Turn their hunt into the galaxy's most awkward group therapy session. Jake looked at the approaching fleet, then at the humming quantum processors, then at his companions, an alien princess whose touch could reshape reality and a mad scientist who collected dangerous artifacts for fun. You know what, he said. I've had worse plans. The quantum manipulation array hummed with enough power to light a small star system, its crystalline components resonating in harmony as Elena's fingers danced across controls that existed in several dimensions simultaneously. Jake watched the approaching fleet on the facility's sensors, noting the beautiful irony that representatives from 3 different species were about to blow each other up in their eagerness to capture him and Lyralii. Incoming transmission from the lead ethereal vessel, Elena announced, adjusting her headset. Emperor Valdris himself wants to have a chat. Lyralii's elongated ears flicked back in surprise. My father is here personally. Along with half the ethereal war fleet, a Terran task force, and enough order of stellar purity ships to purify a medium-sized galaxy. Elena's grin had the manic quality of someone who'd found the universe's ultimate practical joke. Oh, and those Shadow Conclave ships just dropped out of hyperspace. They're broadcasting on frequencies that technically don't exist yet. Jake rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Let me guess, they all want to discuss our relationship over coffee and plasma cannons. Actually, your father's transmission is quite polite, Elena said to Lyralii. He's requesting permission to dock and discuss the quantum catastrophe you've unleashed upon the galaxy. His words, not mine. The facility shuddered as warning shots from multiple fleets bracketed their position. Jake watched probability streams cascade across Elena's monitors like digital waterfalls, each calculation showing their odds of survival decreasing by the second. What exactly happens if we let them all dock? He asked. Best case scenario? Diplomatic negotiations that end with you two in separate detention facilities on opposite sides of the galaxy, Elena replied cheerfully. Worst case? They accidentally start an interdimensional war while arguing over custody arrangements. Lyralii moved to the main quantum processor, her skin patterns now glowing bright enough to read by. There is another option. Elena, can this array manipulate probability on a fleet-wide scale? Theoretically, yes. Practically, it would require quantum entangling approximately 47 ships with varying levels of dimensional shielding. Elena paused her calculations. Actually, that's not the crazy part. The crazy part is it might actually work. Define work, Jake said, though he suspected he knew where this was heading. We quantum entangle all the pursuing fleets with each other, Lyralii explained, her voice taking on the harmonics that suggested she was communing with forces beyond normal physics. Their aggressive intentions become shared across the quantum link. They'll be forced to experience each other's perspectives. Galactic group therapy through exotic physics, Elena added helpfully. What could possibly go wrong? Jake looked at his companions, an alien princess who could reshape reality with her thoughts and a human scientist who collected dangerous artifacts like some people collected stamps. 6 months ago, his biggest concern had been finding his next paycheck. Now he was contemplating using ancient quantum technology to psychically link hostile war fleets. You know what the really crazy part is, he said. This actually sounds like a reasonable plan. The facility's proximity alarms shrieked as the first wave of ships entered weapons range. Jake could see muzzle flashes through the observation ports as the various fleets began taking warning shots at each other, apparently deciding that diplomatic solutions were overrated. Initiating quantum entanglement sequence, Elena announced, her hands moving over controls that hummed with barely contained energy. Jake, I need you to interface with the probability matrix. Your quantum signature is the key to making this work. I don't know how to interface with probability matrices. Sure you do, Lyralii said, taking his hand. You've been doing it unconsciously your entire career. Every impossible escape, every lucky break, you've been quantum surfing probability streams without realizing it. Jake felt something click into place as their hands touched, like a circuit completing itself across dimensions he couldn't name. The facility's quantum processors responded to their combined presence, probability calculations shifting from chaos to elegant mathematical poetry. Oh, that's interesting, Elena muttered, watching her displays. Your quantum entanglement is creating a resonance cascade. The array is amplifying your connection exponentially. Through the facility's sensors, Jake could feel the approaching ships like distant heartbeats in the cosmic dark. Terran vessels driven by duty and bureaucratic necessity. Ethereal cruisers powered by centuries of tradition and genetic superiority. Order ships burning with religious fervor. And threading through it all, the shadow conclave vessels that seem to exist partially outside normal spacetime. Engaging entanglement field, Elena announced. Reality hiccuped. For a moment, Jake experienced the universe from 47 different perspectives simultaneously. He was a Terran admiral convinced he was preventing an interstellar incident, an ethereal honor guard sworn to protect royal bloodlines, a human zealot determined to preserve species purity, and something else, something that existed in the spaces between seconds, desperate to prevent a future that had already happened. The Shadow Conclave weren't myths, he realized with growing amazement. They were refugees from a potential timeline where the galaxy burned in endless war, trying to prevent the chain of events that led to their exodus through time. Jake. Lyraliai's voice anchored him back to his own perspective. The entanglement is holding, but we need to stabilize it. Around them, the quantum arrays sang with harmonics that made the facility's superstructure vibrate. On the sensors, the approaching fleets had stopped firing at the facility and were now staring at each other with the sudden comprehension that came from shared consciousness. They're experiencing each other's motivations, Elena reported, grinning at her displays. Admiral Hayes just realized that Emperor Valdris is genuinely concerned about his daughter's safety. Emperor Valdris is discovering that the Terrans actually respect ethereal culture. And the Order zealots are having a collective existential crisis about the nature of cosmic diversity. What about the Shadow Conclave? They're relieved, actually. Your quantum entanglement has created a stable probability stream that prevents their original timeline from manifesting. Elena looked up from her controls with something approaching awe. Jake, Lyraliai, I think you've accidentally solved a temporal paradox. The communication system crackled with incoming transmissions as the various fleet commanders began actually talking to each other instead of preparing for battle. Jake listened to ethereal officers discussing cultural exchange programs with Terran diplomats while Order priests debated the theological implications of quantum-assisted enlightenment. Incoming priority transmission from Emperor Valdris, Elena announced. He's requesting permission to come aboard. Alone. Lyraliai's ears tilted forward with curiosity. Grant permission. Dock him at Bay 7. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself face to face with the most powerful being in known space, sharing coffee that Elena had brewed from beans that technically wouldn't exist until next Thursday. Emperor Valdris was tall even by ethereal standards, with the kind of presence that suggested he could end civilizations with a disapproving look. His elongated ears swept back from a face that shared Lyraliai's elegant bone structure, though his eyes held depths that spoke of millennia spent making decisions that shaped galactic history. Captain Morrison, the Emperor said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself seem more dignified. You have caused my daughter to glow. Jake blinked. I'm sorry, what? Quantum entanglement manifestations, Lyraliai explained, those silver patterns on her skin pulsing gently. It's considered quite attractive among my people. Ah. Jake looked at the Emperor, who was regarding him with the expression of someone evaluating a potentially explosive piece of technology. Is that good? It is unprecedented, Valdris replied. The ritual of choosing has not been invoked in 3 centuries. The last time it occurred, it led to the Treaty of Cosmic Harmony that ended the Sector Wars. No pressure, Jake muttered. Elena looked up from her quantum calculations. Actually, the pressure is quite considerable. Your entanglement has created probability resonances throughout this entire galactic arm. You've essentially become a living treaty between dimensional physics and political reality. What she means, Lyraliai said, taking Jake's hand, is that our union has created something new. Not just between our species, but between all species willing to accept quantum diversity. The Emperor studied their joined hands, where silver patterns now traced across both their skin in synchronized geometries. The ancient prophecies spoke of a choosing that would either herald a new age or destroy the cosmic balance. It appears we have our answer. So what happens now? Jake asked. Do we get a nice ceremony, or does the galaxy explode? Why not both? Elena suggested cheerfully. I mean, not literally explode. More like, rapidly expand into new possibilities. Over the following days, the abandoned facility became the site of impromptu diplomatic negotiations as representatives from across the galaxy arrived to witness the quantum entanglement that had turned a terrorist incident into a cosmic breakthrough. Jake found himself appointed as humanity's unofficial ambassador to forces he barely understood, while Lyraliai discovered that royal protocol had no provisions for ruling through quantum mechanics. So let me get this straight, Jake said, reviewing the preliminary treaty documents. We're establishing a school for applied probability management where humans learn quantum philosophy and ethereal study practical survival techniques. Among other things, Lyralii agreed. Elena has agreed to serve as Dean of Dangerous Sciences. And I get to catalog ancient artifacts that shouldn't exist while teaching graduate courses in creative causality violation, Elena added happily. It's everything I ever wanted from a career. Jake looked out at the facility's observation deck, where beings from dozens of species were working together to modify quantum processors and establish permanent research stations. The Shadow Conclave had emerged from temporal exile to serve as advisors on preventing catastrophic timelines, while Order priests discovered that diversity wasn't cosmic blasphemy, it was cosmic necessity. You know, he said to Lyralii, 6 months ago, my biggest worry was making enough credits to keep my ship running. And now? Now I'm worried about making enough coffee to keep a multidimensional research university running. He squeezed her hand, feeling the quantum resonance between them pulse with possibilities. Somehow, that feels like progress. Princess Lyralii smiled, her elongated ears catching the light from distant stars. Captain Morrison, I believe we've successfully completed the most expensive coffee. I don't know how to interface with probability matrices. Sure you do, Lyralii said,